Hi everyone. So today this video is going to be a little bit different than past stuff that I've done, aka the one video I've published so far. Anyway, so today I want to talk about something a little more serious. This summer I've had the amazing opportunity to be participating in a mentorship with Insight Collaborative. I'll link their website down below. They're an organization that focuses mainly on dismantling the paradigm around the way we think and the way we talk about and the way we view issues such as immigration and forced migration. The organization is able to help oversee collaboration and interactions, and this mentorship is focused on helping how to unpack some of these heavy topic areas in a tactful and respectful and educational way, and also continue to spread that message out to the rest of the world. I've been really blessed to be able to participate in this, and already on week 2 I've been learning so much. I heard about this program because of a class that I took last spring on forced migration, which completely opened my eyes to so much that I just wasn't aware of when it came to immigration, to forced migration, and just how substantial a role that plays in our world. This week our topic is language, specifically in how we choose to talk about and what words we use when it comes to talking about forced migration. I want to break down some of the things that I've been able to learn so far and just some lessons that I picked up from the class that I took, and just more interactions and education that I've been really pushing myself to do just for bettering myself. The first little lesson that I've learned is thinking specifically about how we use words. So a lot of times what happens is certain words carry connotations or implications that we aren't really aware of because we don't first educate ourselves about what those words mean. A lot of words such as refugee, illegal migrant, even empowerment and aid and beneficiaries, all these words that sound fairly normal actually carry a lot of connotations and negative effects on those people who those words actually refer to. So let me put it this way. For instance, the word refugee. The word refugee carries a lot of different implications based off of what definition you're specifically looking at. So the word refugee was originally made as a more legal definition when it came to the policies on how we handle immigration and asylum seeking into the US, for instance. Nowadays, what has happened is the word refugee has kind of taken on its own cultural definition, as in the word doesn't necessarily mean that someone who hears it will immediately think of that original legal definition. They might fill in the blank of what images come to mind when they hear the word. Now, this is why it's really important to understand how we are using words. For instance, if I'm talking about a refugee aid program or talking specifically about the refugee crisis after Israel-Palestinian war, things like that, those are all for the purpose of education in pushing a specific message about refugees, not as just like a broad sweeping term to summarize an entire group of people. And this ties really closely into the second thing that I've been learning, which is about understanding what stories are told based off of the words that we use. Now, I'm going to paint a picture for you. You're introducing your friend to someone, and your friend happens to be someone who struggles with mental illness. Now, chances are you're not going to be introducing this person as saying, oh, hey, this is so-and-so, they're my depressed friend. Likewise, if someone struggles with living in poverty, you're not going to say, oh, this is my poor friend. The same way if they're homeless, you're not going to introduce this person as your homeless friend. They are just your friend. Everything else involved in the way that they live and the struggles they have are all part of their story. And all those struggles aren't as ugly as it seems when you hear the word depressed or homeless. The words refugee or illegal immigration or any of these words also carry those same stories. If you are friends with someone who happens to be a refugee, you wouldn't want to introduce them to someone as saying, oh yeah, this is my friend, he's a refugee. Because what you've then done is completely told that person's story for them. Because that word then immediately puts in to the other person's mind whatever they might think about a refugee, or whatever preconceived notions they have about immigration or about asylum seeking or forced migration. And the reality is, a person who has been forcibly displaced or has had to seek asylum in a country, they have such complex stories. Their stories are not going to be the same as everyone else who was involved in the same situation as they are. Each single person is completely unique and has their own unique circumstances, their own unique lessons and stories and experiences, which means they have their own unique thing to then contribute to society. So it's not our place to tell the story for them. It might even be an accident. It's something that we don't often think about, and that's why it's really important to think about how we use the words and what specific stories those words are then telling. This also ties in again with the third thing that I want to point out, which is specifically replacing words that we use. Now, once you understand what implications or stories are told by certain words, the thing that you can then do is find specific words that you may be using without realizing it and replace them. Now, something that I was able to learn in a webinar that we watched this week, which I thought was just really fascinating and something I hadn't thought about before, is the word integration. Now, when it comes to forced migration, when someone is brought into the US, for instance, they've gone through all the processes and they are now in the US as an asylee. Now, what then happens is oftentimes there's different programs or steps or different requirements that they have to do to become integrated into society. Now, integration is a really commonly used word when it comes to forced migration, but oftentimes what happens is integration is skewed to mean something that it really doesn't. The best way to describe this is basically what happens is that people confuse the word integration with assimilation. A classic example of this is when it comes to language. Looking outside just forced migration. This is something that I know I personally have seen in many different instances, especially working in the service industry. So think about a situation where a Chinese American woman comes up to order a coffee, and maybe she doesn't speak English, maybe she speaks very little English, maybe she speaks English but she has a really strong accent. Now, it's very, very easy for the person who's taking that order, who maybe doesn't understand what she's saying or doesn't quite have the ability to understand through her accent, it's really easy for that person to then, even unintentionally or intentionally, come across as really condescending or annoyed that they cannot understand her because of her language. And that's something I would never want someone else to think, because the thing about America is we are built on diversity and equality. So that means if people don't speak English, that's okay. And they're not required to speak English to be a part of society. This is what happens with the word integration, is that when a refugee comes into America to be integrated into society, we immediately think, okay, that means they need to take on all our customs, they need to learn our language, they need to completely adapt to the way that we live our lives and the way that American society says you have to do this, this, and that. And that's not integration. A better word is simply a contribution to society. Or just because they have come from a different country or a country that's in conflict or turmoil or natural disaster doesn't mean that they don't also have their own knowledge, their own expertise, their own personalities that they can then put into our society. Now, I hope this all makes sense, and obviously some of these things maybe you feel like aren't going to come into play with everyday conversation, but these are things that are really important to understand for two reasons. One, the topics will come up. I am sure that if you've ever had any sort of political conversation, the topic of immigration has come up. And it's really important to put aside, all aside on what political stance you have on that, to know how to respectfully talk about these people. Because regardless what your political opinion is, these people deserve respect. And the way that we speak about them, or the words that we choose, is the number one way to show them respect. And the second reason is this goes so much more beyond just refugees or forced migrants. Ideas of understanding words and connotations and the stories that they tell and the stories that they have told and integration, assimilation, all of that can be applied to so many minority groups in America that it's really important to make sure that we are educating ourselves on the background of words and what those words are implying before that we use these words. Now, of course, it's important to understand that we're probably going to mess up. I know I've definitely said words in the past that now I'm looking back and I'm like, oof, I didn't know what that word was implying. Now, it might seem like, oh, why do I want to do all this work? Like, how am I going to know what word is what? And that's why you just are open to learning. There are so many resources now to be able to just go on the internet and find information about just terms that it's really not that challenging. And the last thing I want to talk about is just breaking down some other words when it comes to forced migration and replacement words that you can use instead. Words like aid or saving or rescuing, when you say you're stepping in and giving aid to these refugees and saving them, implies that they are completely helpless. So words that you can use instead is support or accompaniment. Accompaniment is a great word because that paints a completely different picture than the word saving. We don't want to make it look like we're just swooping in and saving the day because these people will be hopeless without us. No, we are accompanying them. We are being their ally. And instead of using words like vulnerable, you can use words like at risk or unprotected. It's not that someone's vulnerable or weak, it's that they're unprotected, meaning they don't have maybe a government who really cares about protecting them specifically for whatever reason. It doesn't mean you can't use words like refugee or integration. Again, it all goes back to that first point that I made about how we use our words. These sort of things are lessons that we can teach others simply by putting them in action in our own lives. There are people out there who have been through it, but they're still people, and they're not any less than us just because of their experiences and their stories. And so they deserve just as much respect when we're talking about them. Now, I appreciate if you have sat through and watched all this. I really enjoyed doing this mentorship so far. I will link down below the Insight Collaborative. There's a lot of different ways that you can help them. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer as best I can, or send you any resources at all. Now, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day.